GenTwo offers to clients ability to securitize almost any asset. It can be liquid asset, traditional asset class, it can be alternative assets, completely exotic assets such as fine wine or art. You always look at the overall story and picture of what the clients are intended to offer to the investors, to find the way to make it more attractive, to make it more interesting. We've done so many products that I didn't even think were possible when I joined, and we're doing them now every day.
This is the Assetizer podcast.
Hi there and welcome. One of our goals at the Assetizer is to take you under the hood of how financial products are made, and I couldn't have a better guest than the one I do today to do just that. Anastasia Bondareva is the head of structuring here at GenTwo. She and her team have already created over 1,500 financial products, turning everything from fine art to physical uranium into bankable, investable securities. But what I thought was really interesting about this conversation wasn't necessarily what they can securitize, but rather how they think about it. As Anastasia likes to say, every product tells a story. Let's take a look at hers. Anastasia, you're the head of structuring here at GenTwo, but I believe your journey to this spot, to this point in time, has taken you from a lot of different places, from Moscow to the United States, I believe, and then to Switzerland. So before we get started on the rest of the podcast and our subject today, why don't you tell us all a little bit about yourself?
Yes, of course. I grew up in Moscow, in Russia, and I studied originally the mathematical methods and economics as my first degree. And once graduating, I joined actually investment banking space, but it was 2008.
It's great timing.
Yes, it was perfect timing, as you can imagine. And after joining originally the IB space, I actually moved then to Big Four. I worked for consulting, I worked for audit and Ernst & Young and PwC. And at some point in time, I realized that that education I got in Moscow, in Russia, on the financial industry is quite focused on math, but not very focused on the economic side of things. And there is no better place to learn about the finance than going actually to the mecca of financial world, to going to US. And that's when I joined I went to Berkeley to do my advanced program in finance. It opened me up a completely different world in terms of what can be done with the companies and how the companies can grow. And upon my return in Moscow, I was focusing a lot on strategy consulting, on operational consulting, mostly in oil and gas sector. And at some point, I knew that Moscow is too limited for what I'm doing, because you're still exposed to the local market mostly, and all the working for international companies here are still mostly solving for the local issues. And I wanted to have a more global exposure. And while looking at the countries where I could settle, Switzerland was immediately on my mind. I knew the country, I knew what to expect, and I loved it. Like, I loved the nature and what the country can offer. So I moved to ETH for two reasons. First, because it offers a great education, and I wanted to fill in the gap I had in my background, because the world of finance and math is like black and white. So it's either yes or no. And when joining ETH, this was a dedication giving me a more management perspective. And management and leadership is assessing everything not from yes or no perspective, but giving this kind of a grayish color.
It might also be worth mentioning for people who don't know Switzerland that the ETH is the Swiss Polytechnic. It's basically the college that Einstein went to. Yeah.
And many other great
other great ones too.
No, and it's one of the top universities in the world.
In the world, yeah.
Actually,
it's a top 10. Okay. So maybe that's a good point to switch to your role here at GenTwo, and I definitely want to get back to this idea of products as stories, because that's something that runs through a lot of the way we think about stuff
Yes.
at GenTwo. But maybe to go back to the beginning, because obviously since you started, that was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So we were a much smaller company
Yes.
back then. I think 30 people when you came in, 20 something when you
20
started. Now we're just over 100. And what I'd like to get a sense of is maybe two things, sort of what you were doing, and I'm assuming you were kind of building something still back then, because the company was fairly
Yeah,
new.
of course, yes.
And what you needed to, what you were trying to accomplish, and then how that evolved over the years. And then after that, we'll come back to how things work today. But that'd be really interesting to kind of look at that journey.
Yeah, so we were much smaller back in the days, and also from the perspective of how we organized the processes on the development side. So it was always a combination of doing the projects, doing the products, and looking how we can optimize existing processes to grow. Because we always knew, when I joined, I think we had around 700 million under management, and now we are above 4 billion. And it was clear from the beginning that we would need to manage much more in the future in terms of life cycle management, in terms of complexity of the products we're working on. So we were always building our internal systems to accommodate for that. And I think this doesn't change. It just the ability, the access to the resources we have now is much more. We maybe had, 3-5 developers at the time. Now we have a very strong team, both in Switzerland and in Pristina. We have a support of UI designers and business analysts.
Yeah.
So it frees us more space to create new processes, while with the support of other teams, we bring them to life.
Maybe you can take a step back and talk about what exactly GenTwo does, what these products are that we're offering, and what client need it fits.
Yeah. So as a company, GenTwo offers to clients who are mostly professional players in the financial market, such as asset managers, family offices, banks, ability to securitize almost any asset. It can be liquid asset, traditional asset class. It can be alternative assets, completely exotic assets such as fine wine or art. Anything that the investor is interested in having exposure to through the structured product. And we help our clients to basically bring this idea into the investable security.
All right, so we help our clients turn pretty much any asset into an investable security through securitization.
Correct.
And our platform, I like to think of it as kind of this securitization, or like we like to call it, Assetization engine. And what's really, really interesting, I think, is just like flip open the hood on this Assetization engine and take a look a bit at how it works. So maybe you can tell me, again, thinking about how it was now, or how it was then and how it is now, but maybe think about, okay, how is your team set up, and what are the processes and steps that you need to take care of, or you need to offer to the client? Because I really like to get a better sense of like just how this thing works.
Okay, sure. So maybe to describe how the structuring process look on our side, and how we come up, what is the way from the idea of the client to the actual bankable security. So usually our clients, they already have an understanding of what they want to securitize, what is the asset class they have in place. And then as a first step, usually our compliance team, internal compliance team, would take care of the first AML KYC checks. Of course, we have our partners, directors of the issuance platforms, and the paying agent, who would do a deeper analysis of all the AML KYC risks that they're all covered. But as a first step, it would always be our internal compliance team who would review the counterparty. After this is done, the structuring and legal team, we call it the products team, would have a look at the documentation and make sure that we actually have an ability to securitize the asset. What does it mean? It means that there is a contractual framework that allows us to create the asset on the issuer's side, that the issuer would actually be holding the asset on their balance sheet. Because if you look at the structured products that we're using to securitize the assets on each individual issuer level or the cell level, if we're talking about the PCC structures, we have the structured notes, structured products, where each note is a liability on the issuer balance sheet. And it's backed by the assets. When the product is just issued, it's cash. And then it's converted into the asset that the product is tracking. If we're talking about private equity, it would be the shares of the private company. If we're talking about fine wine, it would be the wine that the issuer is holding on.
So the actual physical asset.
Exactly. And I think that's where you start looking at the structure. Can you hold the asset directly? Do you need to have a counterparty that would be supporting you there? For example, with the art, you probably would have a free port in place where the asset will be held, because you don't want to probably have it somewhere in the cellar of the directors. Somewhere you need to have a secured space. You probably need to have an insurance, and that's how you start building the product matrix to ensure that when the investors invest in the product and they're promised certain payoff, it is correctly hedged on the issue side.
What does that mean, to be hedged?
It means that you have a security in place, a contractual framework in place to ensure that what you promise you can pay, you actually can pay. You have the assets that allow you to pay what you promise.
So we handle the compliance, then we work with the client on the structure.
Yeah.
Now the issuer, just to be clear, that's not the client, right?
Okay. If you look at the GenTwo ecosystem, there would always be parties that are there for each product. It would be the issuer, the issuance platform, and it would be the paying agent. All the other parties are flexible. There is a framework to ensure the system functions, but from the perspective of the ecosystem, those are parties you always need to have. And the rest can change. You can have custodian broker if you're looking at the liquid assets. You can have an insurer if you need an insurance on your asset. You can have private equity counterparty or the selling shareholder if you're looking into the private investment, or the borrower if you're looking at the credit link note. But this is all interchangeable. It would always depend on the structure that you actually want to securitize.
Okay. And one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of people coming in from the outside confuse us a bit with like a bank, or they think we're the issuer and that we're holding the assets and we're maybe managing the assets, but that's not really true. We're just on the infrastructure side, right?
Correct. We're just a service provider. We just ensure that the flow of funds is as described. So basically that when we create a security and we describe something in the term sheet, that the funds do not flow into the other asset, not as described on the term sheet. So if the product is tracking performance of certain fund, that the funds are allocated to the, once raised, are allocated to this fund and not to, I don't know, private equity companies, which is a completely different entity. So we always make sure that the flow of funds is as intended. So GenTwo is a service provider. We are not making an investment decision if this product is good or not. We are not advising anyone to invest in this product. We are not allocating our own funds to this project or product. But what we do is we just analyze the structure. We make sure it's correctly represented to the investors. But again, we do not trade. So the GenTwo is not a bank. We are not an investment management company. We don't have our own trading. We are not investing in the products we are structuring, or we are helping our clients to structure. And we are agnostic to the counterparties our clients are working with. So you can select any custodian broker you want to work with. You can select any paying agent you want to work with. You can invest in any company, and we would help you bring this idea to the market and to the investors. But we're not going to make a decision or advise anyone to invest or not invest, or to assess this product from any perspective rather than does it represent to investors the idea how you want it to be represented.
And that all the paperwork's correct and the legal stuff is correct, so people can trust in it.
So yes, so the idea is that we would review it on our side, but of course we'll have counterparties such as directors of the issuer and the paying agent who would also review the documentation from the perspective of its legality and completeness. But we also always rely on the lawyers of our clients who would bring the documentation to us. So I think it's always, I would say, at least 4 parties would have a look at these documents before they're getting executed, which I think brings quite some confidence to our counterparties and to the investors.
Okay, and what's the end result of all of this?
So the end result, you actually get the product which is bankable and can easily be accessible by different investors from different jurisdictions and any custodian broker who would be willing to or capable of investing and custodying the structured products. And I think the beauty of it is that the investors, they always have ability to look at the product on their balance sheet, on their bank account at their custodian bank. So instead of sending the money to the private equity target, for example, and never knowing what is actually going on with this asset, you have the ISIN in your custody, and you can open your bank statement and you can always see what is going on with the product, what is going on with this investment, because you have calculation agent providing the updated NAV as it becomes available through the SIX ecosystem to the custodian banks. So it makes it more tangible, in a sense, to the investors to be invested in the alternative asset classes.
Yeah, I mean, I get a sense also it's tangible, it's very easy, right? You don't have to, it's just sitting there, you can buy it easily, you can put it in your custodian account, you don't have there's very little friction as an investor.
Exactly, and you also have very little paperwork, because imagine you want to invest in you want to grant a loan to a private company. It means you need to do the due diligence on this company, you need to sign the loan agreement, you need to monitor the payments, if the interest arrived on time, etc., etc. While investing in the credit-linked note on the private company means you have an ISIN on your bank account and you receive the constant interest payments in the form of a coupon with the regularity as described on the term sheet. You avoid this paperwork by investing for structured products. And it saves time on all sides, because also from the perspective of the target company, you don't need to do diligence on each individual investors. They are coming from regulated financial entities, mostly banks. And it means that on all sides, the paperwork is reduced and the trust doesn't need to be verified through different screenings, because as long as one counterparty did the due diligence, the other counterparty can trust that it has been done within the same framework and within the same standards.
So, as I understand it, our work doesn't just end with the issuance of the product, right? We're also providing services after that.
Of course. Yes, so we have a dedicated team to the lifecycle management of the products. What does it mean? The product, once issued, the life of it doesn't stop. It's just the primary market that has completed. But then the product moves to the secondary market. What does it mean? It means that the new orders can be placed into the product. The product units can be redeemed by investors. And this is all supported from the network of our lifecycle management team, the paying agent, and the SIX ecosystem. And this is one side of things. And another side of things is, every time there is a new investment into the product or redemption of the product, it means that the underlying side of the product needs to be maintained. With the liquid assets, it's quite easy. You just liquidate the part of the portfolio and transfer the funds back to the paying agent for redemptions. Or you do the other way around for the new subscriptions. You take the funds from the paying agent into custodian account and you invest it into the designed portfolio. But with the non-bankable things, it's a little bit more tricky because you need to make sure that this investment opportunity still is there. But we support our clients throughout the whole life cycle of the product, meaning that if the new funds are being raised, we would review together the new documentation or existing documentation on the product to ensure that the new investment is done into whatever asset is being securitized through the product.
One of the questions that I get asked a lot when I'm talking to people is, are you regulated? And the answer is, we're not regulated. And a lot of people say, oh, that sounds a bit dodgy, but it's quite the opposite. Because like you said before, we're not a party to these things. We don't manage any money. We don't hold any money. We're providing an infrastructure. We don't actually, as GenTwo, need to be regulated. But as I understand it, everybody that we work with, we only work with regulated parties, right?
This is correct. So in our ecosystem, the parties that need to be regulated are regulated. For example, directors of the issuers we're working with, they're regulated in the respective jurisdiction. The paying agents, they're regulated as a security dealer or the bank in Switzerland, so it's a FINMA license. And the rest of the parties as well. So if we are talking about the liquid assets that need to be custodied, this custodian broker would be regulated. And independent of jurisdiction, it would be the level of the regulatory approval that is needed with this specific country.
So one of the unique aspects of our setup, as opposed to maybe a bank setup or a securitization specialist, is that all of our products are off balance sheet. They're all completely asset backed. They're in their protected cell. And that has a lot of advantages, right?
Of course, yes. So the issuer would always be the owner of the assets, no matter what happens with the respective counterparty the issuer is working with. So, for example, for the liquid assets, for the securities, the issuer would always be recognized in the systems as the owner of those assets. So in case of the default of the custodian broker, the securities in the name of the issuer would always be in the name of the issuer. And this is with all of the assets. So our products are mostly not securitized through derivative framework, but through actually holding the assets by the issuer.
So Anastasia, that sounds like a lot of work to do to get these products out. Tell us a bit about your team.
Okay, so my team is amazing. I love my team. I think what makes it so interesting to work for GenTwo is that we have an amazing people and professionals in my team, but also in other teams we are collaborating with. And in my team, we are 4, and we all come from a very different backgrounds. We have people who've been for 10 plus years in banking doing structured products. We have people who did structured and infrastructure finance. We have a person who did private equity investments. So it's a very diverse experience, but that's what makes it so interesting, because we never look at the product from one perspective. We always discuss interesting cases in the team and collaborate on finding the best solution, because we're building on the experiences of each other and the product we've already done.
So you said at the beginning of our talk that every product is a story. And I really want to get back to that. I mean, after having done 1,500 of these almost, is that how you see it? And like, how do these stories come to life for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Because for me, each product is unique, and you can always find a different perspective to look at it. That's why we also discuss it a lot in the team, to find a better way to represent it, to wrap it, to look for the things that probably we know already investors would be looking to see. If you are talking about the gold, insurance would be something that most of the clients would expect to see built into the product. If you're looking about at the art, most likely we would be looking at storing it at the free port, and some other details, but you always look at the overall story and picture of what the clients are intended to offer to the investors, to find the way to make it more attractive, to make it more interesting, to find the hidden interesting factors that you can highlight in the term sheet.
Okay, so can you give us some examples like of interesting products or challenging products or things that really maybe only we could have done?
Yes, absolutely. So one of my favorites is physical uranium. I think this one is tricky because everything related to trackers on physical assets is always a little bit tricky because you really need to time the secondary market. Because the idea is that you really want to track one asset, and then you want to avoid the situations where the settlement between the secondary market and investment into the underlying asset, which is hedging the product, takes forever. So it's always a very tight deadline to take the funds that were brought in the secondary market by investors and invest in. So it's always a very aligned collaboration between the paying agent, between the directors, between GenTwo, who is supporting the life cycle of the product, and between the client, who needs to make sure that the documentation is in order and the investment process can go smoothly.
So this process that you've been describing, which we like to call assetization, which is kind of our word for this sort of broad-based, low-friction type of securitization that can be used for pretty much any asset, that's got to change things, right? I think it opens up new possibilities and new kind of use cases. Or maybe putting the question the other way around, with our assetization/securitization engine, what, in your opinion, can clients and also investors start to do that you really maybe couldn't do before?
I think we already do it and we already see it. And as I mentioned before, we are agnostic to what our clients do. And since we are not invested in the idea in that sense, we can put anything into the strategy. It can be even from the traditional assets perspective. If we're talking about the liquid assets, traditional actively managed certificates or products, they're usually tracking very specific asset class or very specific company. We can do a completely flexible portfolio on our side. The strategy can be invested in fixed income, in equity, in alternative assets such as funds, all combined in one strategy. For example, our clients often use it to create hybrid structures where the funds are originally raised and invested into the liquid strategy, but then as long as they cannot find the fitting investment opportunity, they would be tracking this liquid portfolio, but as soon as they find the investment idea that is fitting for their strategy, a great private equity, for example, transaction, they would invest the liquidity in there. So you have these hybrid structures and ability to be completely flexible within the framework. I think where it also brings a great value is in the investments into the funds, because we all know that private funds transactions can be very complex. It's 100+ pages of documentation. It's due diligence on each individual investor. While asset managers who want to offer this opportunity to their investors, they can bundle them all together in one product, and then this product can track either performance of one fund or performance of multiple funds, but it always no burden in terms of documentation on the clients. And we know that professional institutional clients, they're really burdened with the documentation from their banks, from the authorities, from the investment targets they're looking at, and it's all being taken care of by the GenTwo legal team. So for example, I had a bank reaching out to me, looking into supporting their client into investment into the fund. And they knew that it would be a very complex onboarding process on their side, from their compliance team, that it would be really cumbersome for them to onboard this fund within their custody system. However, for us, we have experience with these fund structures. For us, it would not be an issue, and they could support them through offering the sell within their existing issuer to this specific investment opportunity. So like this, the banks can serve even the clients where traditionally it would be cumbersome for them to be of help.
And if you can securitize everything in a perfect world, then that kind of changes the investment landscape or expands the investment universe, right? And we're getting towards a situation where more and more people can become investors. There's more and more types of products that can be made, and the playing field kind of levels out, right? So sort of one of the byproducts of what we do or what companies like us do is kind of a democratizing effect. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. And I think what is interesting in what you said just now is that the traditional finance believe in diversification. And traditionally, you could only diversify between or allocate between as many investments as maybe fixed income, maybe some portion of alternative assets, some liquid equity. But right now, with our solution, we're really expanding the selection of assets that the investors can be using for diversification. So it's a completely different field. So maybe we would need to review the world of finance and traditional asset allocation.
Yeah. As you said, we like to say that we want to be able to securitize anything. My question is, do we even know now what anything is, or are there things coming up that may surprise us?
Oh, I think we definitely don't know what's coming up. Coming back to the beginning of our conversation where you asked me how was it in 2020 when I joined GenTwo and when we're here, we've gone such a road. We've done so many products that I didn't even think were possible when I joined, and we're doing them now every day. And I just believe that it would continue expanding because that's what makes working for GenTwo so much fun.
Great. Well, it was a lot of fun talking to you as well today. Thanks so much, Anastasia.